because you can't get rid of this stuff. If you sublimate it, it takes on a life of its own. It takes on a will of its own, right?
I am very sorry. There won't be the abundance of humor derived from the implicit or explicit nature of Freud's work. Freud is good for that type of content. Easy, even. Like his mom. Sorry. Had to. Big target. Like his mom.
Wow.
Okay. Done. Got out of my system. I promise. I'm sure his mom was a lovely lady.
That was his other self. It's trying to reveal his hidden feelings.
There they are!
Jung is a whole different animal than Freud. Freud was all about like the sexual, carnal id and its needs and desires and all of that. And Jung is very different, as you'll see in this video. Jung. Jung is a name to confuse the heck out of you if you actually do the reading before class in like intro psych. It's spelled like it would be pronounced Jung, but it's pronounced like it would be spelled Y-O-O-N-G. And yeah, I've actually seen some intro psych textbooks that have like a pronunciation guide for it, just so when you get to class, you know what the heck the professor's talking about, because Jung is not a name that is intuitively pronounced to most Americans. Similar to Freud and psychoanalysis, Carl Jung was a Swiss medical doctor and psychologist, he got a dual degree there, who founded the psychodynamic school. I've also heard it called the analytic school, you know, different names, but it's Jung's approach to things. Something I didn't bring up in the Freud video or other history videos I put on this channel so far is that in the early days of psychology, a lot of the people, okay, let's be honest, a lot of the men, because that's how science mostly worked back then, some exceptions, a lot of the men doing early psychology research were medical doctors or otherwise interested in the biological workings of things. So Pavlov would be an example. He discovered classical conditioning while he was trying to study the gustatory process in dogs. The goal of the Jungian analytic process, especially therapy, is to have the person become more aware of the different unconscious factors that may be influencing their behavior, their attitudes, their thoughts, their feelings, their whatever. And awareness is good. Being aware of what's impacting your behavior, good. So far, no problems. On the whole, I don't have as many problems with Jung's approach as I do with Freud's. And we'll talk about the specifics there as we go through. But there is still the huge concern of falsifiability and its lack thereof. We will get there towards the end of the video, but I want to go through Jung, his approach, his philosophy, and all of that before we actually get to the critiques, but they are coming. I'll be doing the same lecture shorthand in this video that I did in the Freud video. That means that when I'm talking about Jung's theory, Jung's beliefs, Jung's predictions, Jung stuff, I won't say that explicitly every time. I'll just be talking about the predictions, the beliefs, the theory, all of that, without couching it every single time. So instead of Jung would say that, or Jung argues that, or the analytic approach predicts that, it's just, this is the prediction, or this is how stuff works, this is the nature of things, as if it were a universal truth. I do not believe that is the case, but to save on wordiness and also make it less boring for you guys, just remember it's all encapsulated with this huge asterisk of this is the Jungian approach, this is what he believed, this is what the analytic approach would predict. As with the Freud video, I'll be periodically interrupting myself with thoughts or comments. Unlike the Freud video, since there isn't the huge emphasis on sex, there won't be the naughty comments, but there will be some mystical shots in their place.
Some Persona.
Freud and Jung did...
So if you don't know, Persona, the game that I'm playing through right now, Persona 2, the Persona series is basically SMT with a little bit of the Jungian approach superimposed on it. Now, chat, I will not argue that, like, this is like, you know, I'm not sure how well the creators of Persona understood Jung, right? I'm not a huge reader of Jung myself. I know the basics, but yeah, like, this is where the terms Jungian psychology are where terms like persona, shadow, God, I'm trying to think of you, like, there's a whole bunch of archetype, archetype is a Jungian term. So in other words, the arcana in Persona, do you see how it's all kind of tied around this like, you know, concept of Jungian psychology?
For a while have a professional relationship. When Freud
And in fact, we haven't met him yet, but one of the characters, one of the good guys in Persona is a character named Philemon. Philemon, right? Philemon was Jung's spirit guide. So Jung indulged in some mysticism and some woo himself, and one of these, you know, I don't know, you want to call it like a dream character? I guess we could call Philemon like a dream character. Philemon was a dream character who supposedly advised Jung on things, and was you know, a very helpful you know, force, I guess, in his understanding, right? So yeah, there's a lot of stuff in here that are a lot of stuff in Persona that is directly tied to the work of Carl Gustav Jung.
first approached Jung, he was already a doctor, but Freud took him on kind of as a student. And for a while they had that relationship, and it seemed like Freud sort of wanted Jung to take over the family business, as it were, but it didn't work out that way. Jung did agree with Freud on some points, like the importance of the unconscious mind and also early childhood experiences on forming who we are as adults. They disagreed, though, on the exact contents of the unconscious. Freud saw it sort of as a dumping ground for inappropriate thoughts, feelings, desires, drives, whatever, and was ruled by the id, which is this facet of the unconscious that is sort of your lust beast and wants just what it wants now.
Oh my god,
And Jung
Lust
said,
beast,
sure, there
huh,
can
okay.
be those inappropriate things down there, but there's more to it than that. It's much more important and meaningful.
Can I try something? Cass, if you're watching, feel free to correct me, but I think that the id is best described as our unsocialized being. Am I right? Does that fit, chat? Do you get what I'm saying? Our unsocialized self, right? So it's not something that really considers other people. It's not necessarily like, you know, like, right, and it's not even something that terribly considers like the effect of our actions on our own well-being. Like she said, lust beast, right? It's pure desire in a lot of ways. And, you know, although there's nothing inherently wrong or evil about pure desire, you can see how being ruled by your id might be problematic.
Than just this dumpster of...
And again, we're talking about social constructs here, more specifically constructs of psychology. These are not, like, in other words, there's no research, like, you know, that says, okay, yep, there's an id. Nope. There's an id here, right? Like, and like, you know, like with any social construct, it's kind of arbitrary, where you demarcate and say, okay, this is where the id ends and the ego begins, right? We use these terms to have a handle on concepts that are extremely slippery, that we wouldn't be able to discuss without this terminology. But we have to remember at all times that the map is not the territory, right?
Inappropriate things. Jung did have some objections to Freud's approach, specifically the childhood development part. Jung objected to the importance of childhood sexual experiences in the formation of neuroses as an adult. He didn't think it had to be sexual in nature, and we'll go through his developmental model and stuff, but he really didn't like that, and that was part of what caused the schism between the two of them. Similar to Freud, Jung worked on a model of personality, and also a little bit of a developmental theory, and built a therapeutic approach. So, let's go through those.
And just a little more background, that therapeutic approach isn't an extremely popular one in this day and age. A lot of people have moved past Jung. You know, see Jung as being important in the development of psychology, but aren't necessarily going to use his theories and his approach, you know, in the pursuance of therapy. There is a school of psychology, there is a school of therapy that does, you know, use this, right? But it's not the not the predominant one. There are other theorists in the years since Jung that have somewhat supplanted him in terms of therapeutic approach.
There are really two categories of things to talk about for Jung and personality. The first is easier to cover, and so let's start there. The first are types of personality. Jung was the first to break down one aspect of people's personality, namely introversion and extroversion, although the definition has somewhat drifted since he came up with it. Jung's definition of introversion and extroversion really hinged on what a person wants to do with their psychic energies. And so this, remember, historically, psychic doesn't mean what it does today. It's not talking to spirits, predicting the future.
When Freud talked about the psyche, he meant the self, right? Rather than, although, well, I mean, it depends on your level of mysticism, right? But, psyche can mean soul. Psyche can imply metaphysics, but it doesn't have to.
Or a Pokemon type. It's not what we're talking about with psychic energy. Psychic energy at this point was sort of just a catch-all term for things of the mind. Introverts.
Oh yeah, psychic energy. That would definitely confuse the modern.
Were said to be focused on their internal psychic world, whereas extroverts were focused more on the external world. Jung was also of the mind that a person would be both introverted and extroverted, or at least have features of both, but one would be more dominant. The current view of introversion and extroversion is that this trait, personality trait, exists
we are not
along
on
a
politics,
continuum.
are we?
And so you, as a person, will exist somewhere along this continuum. If you are high on introversion, you will be low on extroversion. If you are high on extroversion, you will be low on introversion. And if you're sort of somewhere in the middle, you are an ambivert. Lovely term. If you aren't familiar with these terms, or you've just heard them sort of kicked around but don't really know how to think of it or what you are, think about what your perfect night would be. If you could do anything, unlimited resources, people's schedules completely clear, what would you do? An extrovert would want to go out, hang out with friends, maybe go to a party, go to a bar, do something very social, very active, very out and about and doing things. An introvert's answer might be more secluded, at home, maybe with some friends, maybe not, maybe playing some games, maybe just reading, watching movies, whatever. It's a much more quiet, contained experience compared to the extrovert's loud, raucous experience of things of an ideal night. And if you're like my husband in talking about this, and you go, well, it depends on the situation, you're more of an ambivert. Personally, I'm much more on the introverted side of things. That's my happy place. That's where I recharge my batteries. I do go out and do things, but...
Okay, God, it's funny, because, maybe I'm an ambivert. I would rather, yeah, I guess depending on the night, right, or depending on what I've done, you know what I mean? If I've already streamed that day, given unlimited time, whatever she's, you know what I mean? Given, no other, engagements, I think I'd rather spend the time learning, engaging with other people's content, right? Or reading, or you know what I mean? Even watching a good movie or something like that. However, if I hadn't done the stream that day, I think that streaming, which, you gotta ask yourself, is that social? I mean, I guess so. I'm putting myself in front of a large audience of people. I'm interacting with them, right? But there's a limited level at which the interaction goes on. In other words, nobody can brush my hair, right? Or brush their hand against my hair, right? Nobody can physically, touch me, right? So you could piss me off, you could say something that makes me happy. You could make me question my beliefs. You could let me know how something that I said affected you, but there's a limit to how I can be interacted with by an audience. So maybe it's in that context that I'm more comfortable with it.
Left to my own.
And also there's a question of set and setting. You know what I mean? I enjoy social interactions with certain people, but the people that I enjoy social interactions with is somewhat limited, right? I couldn't just socially interact with 5 random people and expect to enjoy myself. I'd have to socially interact with 5 very specific people to enjoy myself. So, I don't know. I guess I fall into that ambivert. What about you, chat? What do you think? Are you just let me know in chat if you feel like you're more of an extrovert, if you feel like you're both, you're depending on the situation, or if you feel like more of an introvert.
Vices, I don't. I mean, hello. Sort of implicit in this description is the shift from Jung's original definition of it. So Jung's original definition was about the person's sort of internal orientation to things, if they were sort of navel-gazy or if they focused on the outside world, whereas now it's more of a social interaction concept, not necessarily just where one's focus is. Last thing I want to say here is there are some interesting experiments looking at introverts versus extroverts on different things. Like there's even some neuroimaging experiments that shows a little bit of a processing difference in how introverts and extroverts deal with the world. But topic for another day, so let's continue on with the other aspect of personality. The second category of Jung's personality work I want to talk about is the structure of personality. So this was another disagreement point between Freud and Jung. As we talked about in the last video, Freud's got the id, the ego, the superego, and the id's the devil on the shoulder, the superego is the angel on the shoulder, and the ego is you in between them. Jung didn't completely disagree with Freud on the structure of personality, but there are some very important differences. Jung didn't completely discard Freud's model of personality, especially like the importance of the unconscious, but there were some very important key distinctions that we're going to talk about. So Jung kept the concept of the ego as this part that you consciously have access to, but that's about all he kept from Freud. But instead of Freud's version of the unconscious, chief resident of which is your id, which is all about instant gratification and satisfaction and gimme, 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 Jung has two forms of the unconscious. First
Wait a
is the
minute.
personal.
Is that right? Wait. Okay, so wait. Oh God. Okay, so ego, id, and superego. Those are Freudian constructs. Is the id solely involved in satisfaction, though? So it's definitely involved in catharsis. I would agree with that. But some catharses are not what we call satisfactory. In other words, the death drive is cathartic for sure. And it's not, beneficial to the organism. But I guess you could argue that that's like an immediate longing that doesn't go through the filter of id and superego. So in other words, I guess I see the superego as our internalized social setting. How we think that we're viewed by the outside world and how we should present ourselves in light of that. Like how to modify the expression of the ego and the id to make it socially acceptable. I'd say it's like what I always interpreted the superego as being a part of.
Unconscious, which is kind of the closest map to Freud's unconscious. The personal unconscious does house the repressed things, the inappropriate.
Oh, we got a question about sound. Are you talking about the audio here?
Things that a person
or the levels
doesn't want to think about or remember.
It
just
is
like
a little
Freud.
bit loud.
But it doesn't have the hard negative value that Freud's unconscious did. There could be positive things floating down around in the unconscious too. They float. Oh yes, they float. When you're down there, you'll float too. Similar to Freud, Jung believed that people don't have direct access to the stuff in their unconscious. So these are the thoughts, feelings, memories, drives, whatever. They can't access it directly. Whereas Freudian psychology had conflicts that a person needed to go through during development and resolve.
So the reason that I had this at the same volume as the last video. The reason you're hearing a difference is actually here's Irene's detour, Irene's tangent, but it's a tool called a compressor. All right, a compressor takes your dynamic range, and that is to say, sometimes you're really quiet, sometimes you're really loud, right? It takes those quiet and loud, the troughs and the crests, and it kind of smushes them together. It brings everything closer together, right? So it's useful, right? In that, like, maybe sometimes you're talking so quiet it's hard to hear you. Maybe sometimes you're a little loud, right? And this will kind of moderate all of that. The other thing that it does though is it like causes, like, you can hear a lot more of like her mouth noises, for instance. Oh my god, I am not critiquing your audio casts. I'm just noting something about setups. I don't even know if it's good or bad. I don't know enough about audio to say that. I'm just learning this stuff for myself, but I think that what you're hearing, Chad, is like compression, so that even though it's at the same volume level, we're experiencing that sound in a different way.
Jung had complexes, and
I can definitely hear where some of the quieter aspects of her voice have been raised, right? Like the clicks that occur in your mouth from your tongue, saliva, your teeth, etc. Oh my god,
different.
Chad, it sounds like I'm not criticizing.
Complexes are snag points in the personal unconscious.
I do not have good enough sound to be able to criticize somebody else, okay?
These are like tangled cables in a box of other cables that just, it's a gnarly little bit of your unconscious compared to the rest of it, which is fairly chill. If you follow me on Twitter, this is the part at which my brain started to hurt. I'm doing my best in trying to synthesize all the sources and make it comprehensible, but it's a lot. The personal unconscious is dominated.
Anybody follow her on Twitter and know what she's talking
by
about?
These complexes, and so
I don't.
You don't have direct access to stuff in your personal unconscious, but these complexes might be completely inaccessible, like the rest of the stuff in there. They could be partially accessible, or they could be fully accessible. I'm not sure how that fits together, but I don't know. Unlike the sort of negative view of everything stored in the unconscious mind in the Freudian view, in the Jungian view of the unconscious, the personal unconscious, complexes can be positive or negative. And it's normal for people to have complexes because rare is a person who lives such a blessed life that nothing ever goes wrong. So it's a normal part of life that you develop these complexes. At the core of every complex is an archetype, and we'll talk about those in a few. And since making any sense of complexes requires talking about archetypes, we'll just put a pin in these for now, and we'll come back.
You're hearing interference from my mic. Are you hearing like a fan sound? Sorry, what are you not interferences? Wait. So when you say interference, you mean like a radio signal picking up on the mic? Or something, some other signal? Like... Okay, let me make sure I'm like fully plugged in. That's, yeah, I don't think I've ever had that. Okay, so were you hearing this before, or is it only when I moved back? Did you start to notice this robotic sound? Okay, I think I know what that is. Okay, I think I get what that is. Basically, I just need to be closer to the mic. So chat, I thought I could kind of rest. I thought I could kind of lean back. Is this better? Is this better? Okay, so the reason you're hearing that is because I've got a process going on in my mic called noise reduction. What that does is it takes sounds like the fan behind me and it makes them inaudible. So anything under a certain sound level is going to get like eliminated. It's going to get crunched out, right? So it works fine when I'm up here and my voice is like this level of sound and the fan is that level of sound. You're not having a problem with that. But when I lean back, then what happens is my voice gets quiet enough that it's part of my voice is now no longer louder than the sound behind me. And so that's where you're getting the robotic stuff. You might have experienced this on Discord if you're a Discord user. If you're in the VC on Discord, you'll notice this with when you've got the sound what is it called, the noise filter. When you got the noise filter on, and let's say that let's say that you're watching let's say that you're on speakerphone on your phone on Discord and you're watching something on YouTube. When you talk, you're going to get interfered with by the noise from the from the audio on your phone, right? If you're watching something, right? It's the same kind of thing. Not the robot sound that you get from being like when the connection's not great, but the robot sound that you get from having another audio source interfere, like competing with you.
Isn't really a direct analog of Freud's.
Checking levels. Wait, right now? Is it still problematic? You still got fuzz. Okay. Testing. Yeah, it's definitely... Wait a minute. Testing. So I'm not clipping, and I'm not too quiet. That fixed it? Wait, did it fix it?
Superego in the Jungian model of things. I mean, maybe there kind of is in one of the archetypes, but there's not a one-to-one relationship for sure. The other aspect of the Jungian personality structure is the collective unconscious. The collective unconscious contains knowledge and experiences shared by a species. One way to think of this is as a psychological inheritance. Important things learned or experienced by the ancestors are coded into the collective unconscious through... There are some people that seem to be arguing that this information must be passed down genetically, as Jung didn't believe that we're born as a blank slate, the tabula rasa idea. Topic for another video, I think.
That's a Freud thing.
These books. Yeah. Blank slate. Good book. So he didn't believe that we're born a blank slate, and so this information has to be programmed in somehow, and in our current understanding of things, that means it would be genetic. But then other people are arguing that no, it can't be genetic because the mind is special, so it has to be something else. In the collective unconscious are shared concepts called archetypes. These are patterns of behavior or images that are universal across our species.
And this is where the problem comes in with Jung, okay? There were some assumptions made of universality, which really did not bear truth when they were examined in a closer way, right? So the archetypes that Jung wanted to impose on the human experience weren't universal to all of humanity. They were probably Western-centric. The other thing that I would kind of like to insert into the conversation here is the idea of culture as an organic being. So this is from a very problematic theorist known as Frobenius. He had an idea that bears the Greek name paideuima. The paideuima was the organic being of culture. So Frobenius was talking about, I guess, like, what would you call it? That culture operated like an organism. That in a lot of ways, culture was, you could be seen, don't take this shit too literally, okay? This isn't Gaia theory, and even Gaia theory isn't necessarily meant to be literal, but we're talking about that which is created by our interactions with each other, right? We're talking about, you know, spirituality, culture, music, like the aggregate of this, right? And how, like, sometimes, like, let's say, like, you know, punk rock will be, you know, the ascendant type of music for a while, and then the zeitgeist sort of shifts away, and you get, like, the new romantics, right? So the way that culture twists and turns, the way that culture changes, the way that it feels almost organic was observed by Frobenius and you know, codified as this paideuima thing. And again, we're not talking about scientific stuff right here. We're talking about these are definitely social constructs. But the paideuima is something that I've found to be a somewhat useful framework at looking at culture. And it definitely, I think, comes into play when we're talking about the creation of a collective unconscious. I guess I would also say that it's not as contiguous as Jung wanted to see it. Like, Jung really wanted to see this as, like, since Jung's theory is that this stuff was handed down genetically, there's a continuity there that supersedes cultural boundaries. I would state that cultural boundaries are maybe you could see as points of change within the Paduima, and in ways in which it's not completely, contiguous. That it's not all together. It's not really one Paduima, but it's lots of Paduimas that are linked together through cultural exchange. Oh my god, chat, is this getting too fucking heady?
Apparently, Jung borrowed this archetype from anthropology. His contemporaries in anthropology were studying the cultures of the world and noticing that certain themes or character types were popping up in.
So it's like the Trickster, the Hierophant, like any of the arcana of the tarot, right? But I think a lot of people's problem with Jung was that he wanted to see all culture through, I guess, a Western lens rather than actually grokking cultural figures themselves before, because right, if you go to another culture and you're like, okay, I'm expecting to see the Hierophant. Where's oh, there's the Hierophant right there. You find something that's kind of similar to the Hierophant. Okay, I'm expecting to see the Trickster. Like, I mean, that is kind of universal, right? But like, if you're coming to it with that framework, you're gonna superimpose your Western ideas on other cultures, instead of maybe seeing Western culture as just another expression, and being able to look at it from a more universal viewpoint. I don't think that psychologists, from my understanding, have found like a universal, like a Rosetta Stone for archetypes or anything like that, right? And that's maybe where Jung's, failings,
these disparate groups
begin.
And to Jung, that indicated that these characters are an innate property of the mind. The archetypes are said to be directly unmeasurable, only able to be inferred by analyzing art, myths, stories, dreams. Building something unmeasurable into a theory makes it scientifically impossible to test. And this probably didn't upset Jung because he considered dream analysis and introspection and the work he was doing as equally valid as the empirical stuff that most scientists do. But hey, this isn't just a problem for psychology. In physics, string theory has the same problem. Trying to describe some facet of how the world works without having any way to directly measure key features, the strings, of that theory. While everyone is born with a full set of archetypes, Jung believed that a person's personality would be dominated by one archetype, maybe a handful. Okay, what are archetypes? A really rough definition that I used when I taught intro psych is...
Actually, this is really funny because, like, I can think of cultures that actually ensconce this idea of a dominant archetype into their religious practices. So I'm thinking of, I don't know how to say this, chat. This is going to come across so weird, but let me just use the word bon don. Okay, now you're not familiar with that word, but you do know the word voodoo. You have a vague idea of voodoo, its connection to New Orleans, its connection to Haiti. Really, New Orleans represented a cultural crossroads in a way that, like, in a pretty exceptional way. So when I say Vendôme, I'm trying to free it from its cultural context. Like, I believe this is a more, this traces, like, so we're talking about African roots. And African, so I won't call them gods, because they're not called gods, they're called Loa. Like, I think it's important to see them as distinct from the Western concept of divinity, right? And in a lot of Vendôme, there was one personage, right? And yeah, I'm kind of saying God. It's similar. Okay, it's not that far off from that, but I don't want to cram it into that cultural context because it doesn't belong there. It's its own thing. It arose separate from, the Western conception of divinity, and yet was connected through all the, kind of cultural exchange that went on across the Mediterranean. And in, Haitian, New Orleans voodoo, I'm not as familiar with, the African traditions that these belief systems came from, but one person would be thought to have a special connection with one of the Lua, one of the divine horsemen, divine personages of the tradition, which yeah, does trace back to Africa. But remember, it's Africa through the Middle Passage, through interaction with other cultures. So it's Africa, but not just Africa.
That archetypes are universal, emotionally charged images or thoughts. Honest confession time. I am really working hard at understanding what complexes and archetypes are. It doesn't help that some sources will talk about these things as archetypes, other sources will talk about them as complexes, and some will just interchange the words when they see fit. So I'm trying. Well, there's a bunch. Some sources are saying that there's 4 key archetypes that you need to understand a person.
It's a little like Shadowrun. You know, a lot of games, a lot of fantasy stuff does kind of rip off like other cultures in terms of their spiritual conception of things, and definitely in terms of their, personages, personas, if you will. Right? Do you see how this is connected to Persona? Do you see how this is like, this is why I don't really consider Persona to just be like a normal video game, right? It's like there's like something there.
Personality. Some are saying that there's 12 critical ones to understand things. Other sources just exhaustively list out archetypes and also say that 4 are the important ones, so we're going to go with those 4. The 4 big important archetypes are the persona, the shadow, the anima or animus.
Oh, fuck. Okay, so this is actually a different usage of archetype than I was...
And the self. The persona is you, so your ego, plus all the masks you're wearing. These masks are built up when you're a child to contain the inappropriate thoughts and drives and feelings. These masks also serve to insulate yourself from the outside world. These masks can be influenced by archetypes, so as a person tries to develop...
Freddie, Wilma, Daphne, and Velma. Oh, wait, is this like Scooby-Doo?
develop new behavior patterns, they may incorporate masks.
Oh, Shaggy. Shaggy's definitely on art. Oh yeah, no, you could totally see that. You could. In fact, I've seen people kind of shitpost about like a psychoanalytic interpretation of Scooby-Doo. It's pretty entertaining, actually.
From that archetype. So somebody's a new dad. They may take on aspects of the father archetype in order to better be in that role.
Wait. Okay. Wait. Whoa. Okay. So we had 4 archetypes: shadow, persona. What were the other ones? Do we need to roll this back? Does anybody remember? Shadow, persona. We're probably going to need to roll this back. This is good stuff. Listen, if people are here for it, I would love to do a little bit more intellectually challenging material than you're going to see from the rest of Twitch. Or at least from the rest of political Twitch, right? I think this stuff is interesting, and I feel like my audience has the capacity to understand it that you might not find in a lot of other Twitch audiences. Not to brag, but I'm bragging about you, so it's okay, I guess. Did anybody catch that? The 4 main archetypes, she said? Animus? Okay. Oh yeah, okay, so... And she's explaining these, right? Persona, shadow, animus, anima. So... persona or mask, because that's what it means in Greek. And isn't that interesting that that's, the word, yeah. The self as seen by the outside world, though, right? Because remember that the persona is something that's put on. It's an archetype that you've developed for dealing with the outside world. So in other words, you're a little kid, you act a certain way which is natural to you, and you get punished by your parents. You get punished by your friends, you get made fun of, you get punished by your teacher. You find that your self is incapable of dealing with this external world. So you internalize part of the world that kind of hurts you, and you put on a mask. And under that mask, you're acceptable. You're able to deal. You're able to function. Whereas the self that you start with wasn't. And over the years, we put on a number of these masks. And after you become an adult, most people confuse the mask with their true self. They forgot the original mind. They lost that somewhere in the kerfuffle. And through, I don't know what, some of us are able to get back to that. And there's a power in that. There's a power in your true self that's not present in the persona, but you got to understand the persona that you put on. You've got to understand why it was there in order to get beneath it again, right? Otherwise, you're just going to that mask becomes your face.
Person tries to develop new behavior patterns, they may incorporate masks.
It's weirdly relevant, yeah.
Derived from that archetype. So somebody's a new dad, they may take on aspects of the father archetype in order to better be in that role.
So here she's talking about more the archetypes that I'm familiar with, right? Father, mother, there's even, if you want to get into Peterson, dark father, or this was a Jung thing, right? Dark father, dark mother. So you split your parents, right? I'm universalizing experience that's not universal at all, because people have very, very different parents. Some of us had parents that were extremely abusive from an early age, right? And this might not apply to you, but in general, your first experiences with your parents are, maybe positive. Maybe they're nurturing, they're alleviating your hunger, alleviating your pain, giving you love, giving you comfort, giving you that human touch that you need. And so you've got the good father and the good mother. And then at some point, you're going to meet the bad father and the bad mother. So a child doesn't really have the kind of permanence to see the father that hurts you as the same person as the father that nurtures you, that cares for you, that protects you. So you end up splitting them into two different people. And, this is the dark father, dark mother, archetype.
Problems can arise when a person identifies too much with any of these masks that are sufficiently different from their actual true self.
Chat, what do you want to bet that Cass is a persona player? I could be wrong.
This causes conflicts and a repression of their true identity. This can then lead to suffering, and so it's recommended that a person see an analyst to be able to bring everything back into alignment. The shadow, not the movie, is the darker aspects of our nature. This seems to have the most in common with Freud's id, but there are some key differences. One definition of the shadow archetype is everything that's not in the light of conscious experience. Okay. Similar to Freud's id, this is the warehouse of socially unacceptable drives and behaviors. Unlike Freud's id, the shadow can contain positive traits, feelings, memories, whatever, if those are socially unacceptable. So this is becoming less true today, but to some extent it is still the case in the Western.
So in other words, it's the parts of yourself that when you put on those masks, you didn't just put something on, you took something off. And that something was a part of you. Now, it doesn't really go anywhere. It still is a part of you, but it gets submerged. It gets sublimated. And it's in some ways becomes more powerful when it's out of sight, out of mind. And also like harder to deal with, harder to admit that that's a part of you, because that's a part of you thought you got rid of, that you put on a mask to get rid of, right? And that's a part of you that exposed you to harm. That's a part of you that you grokked as socially unacceptable.
View of gender roles. Men are supposed to be these strong, stoic providers, and women are supposed to be these kind, soft, empathetic beings. So a little boy who is deemed soft, to put it gently, would repress those traits that are making him not manly enough. And a woman who is too hard, so tomboy or assertive or other things, would repress those traits to be more feminine and in line with what's expected of her. But like Freud's
Oh God, anima. I suspect we're gonna get into animus.
id, and I kind of feel like I'm talking about his pet at this point or something. Like Freud's id, the shadow also contains the basic primal drives: lust, greed, gluttony, avarice.
I mean, these tend to be the things that are seen as socially unacceptable, but not always, right? Sometimes these things are prized in society.
All of these things are housed in the shadow. Taking a little ride on the woo train, choo-choo. The shadow represents chaos, as it's the unknown part of your psyche. However, tapping into this idea that this is a universal concept and experience across humanity, there's usually a concept of balancing chaos and order. Jung argued that individuation, we'll talk about this more in detail later, but the quick and dirty version is that individuation is a process that a person has to go through in order to become a happy, healthy, well-adjusted.
It's when you stop seeing yourself as an extension of your parents or whoever takes that role in your life, right? Because again, not to over universalize, some of us don't grow up with our birth parents, right? But like really, like those who fill the role of your caretakers as a child.
Adult. Jung argued that individuation requires balancing the chaos with the order. If this sounds familiar, you can probably predict what or whom the next video in this series is going to be talking about. The best I can figure, and it's really having to synthesize from a couple different sources here, the shadow archetype.
Oh, Peterson. I think it's Peterson.
Is basically the chaos.
So I think this was her like introduction. This was her first video touching upon, and it makes sense too. If you want to understand Peterson, you've got to understand Jung. And then you've got to understand how Peterson misunderstands Jung.
Archetype.
The Dragon of Chaos.
And the persona archetype is the order archetype. So you have this balance between order and chaos and the balance between the persona and the shadow. Another balancing part of the shadow is you need the shadow in order to have depth as a person. If you didn't have a shadow and these unconscious drives and thoughts and feelings, you would basically just be a walking archetype. Because the shadow isn't a part of consciousness, aspects of it can be projected onto other people without your knowledge. Let's take a completely hypothetical example.
So in other words, you'll notice these qualities more readily in other people than you will in yourself.
It never happens. Let's say growing up, you've got a little boy who discovers that he has attractions to other boys. Basically, he's kind of figuring out that he's gay. But his family, his friends, his social structure, so let's say church, have a very anti-gay view. People who have the same-sex attraction and act on it are sinners, they're going to hell, they're bad people, maybe love the sinner, hate the sin at a mild end, a lot of these views that we do see sometimes. This person represses these same-sex attraction feelings down into the unseen lands.
Peterson is misunderstood Jungian psychology that is itself kind of a disproven concept. I mean, yeah, it's more of a concept that's been like it was instrumental in sort of building what we've got now, but is incomplete in and of itself.
Maybe in addition to the attraction being
and maybe has some baggage as well.
Repressed, they repress the shame and anger that they're feeling as a result of that attraction as well.
I mean, this is unfalsifiable shit. So yeah, definitely unproven.
They grow up, they haven't gone through the individuation process yet, so they're not aware of their unconscious stuff.
And you can see how people regard this as non-scientific because it's unfalsifiable.
And they see somebody who's...
In a lot of ways, I think that Jung was just like... It feels more like a traditional role, that might have been kind of excised from Western culture, that is remanifesting as Jungian psychology. When we talk about dream analysis and stuff like that, when we talk about understanding these unconscious processes, this is traditionally the role of a spiritual leader And like I say that, I almost want to like, there's different ways I could say this. I could say spiritual leader, I could say shaman, I could say a lot of different things, right? And they all kind of miss the point. But that there's always been a role for somebody to help people deal with their unconscious, I guess.
Okay. With this shadow projection, they would then project all this hatred and anger and this
More like hydrotherapy.
disgust that they feel about themselves onto people who are gay. They can't stand these feelings, and so they act out against people of that community. The anima for men and the animus for women are the archetypal representations of.
Okay, let's take this back, because like I know that y'all can't take like too much of like, you know, she's throwing some intellectual concepts of you. I don't want to get too much in our heads. Let's bring this back to Persona, okay?
There he is!
Kanji!
Oh, my, thank you for your undivided attention.
Oh god, I'm gonna have to give you context here. So this is a character, Kanji, and if you know Persona, you know the fact that his eyes are yellow show you that that's not Kanji, that's his shadow, right? So if you see somebody with yellow eyes, you know, then in Persona, that's usually a shadow. And so Kanji's, you know, kind of a juvenile delinquent, right? Kanji's a bad boy, right? So a tough boy. And so for him to appear as effeminate is very much out of line with his character. So why are we seeing this? And in the game, you know, like it's because like he's suppressed part of himself. And you know, if you know the character, like a very real part of himself, like the things that he likes to do that are socially unacceptable. Now the game plays this off as it's not that he's gay, like, so his shadow appearing as gay isn't representative of his own sexuality, but rather of his fear of what his quote unquote effeminate qualities belie, right? That the idea that him liking to do like arts and crafts, him liking to do things that are not like traditionally male is like it, you know, means that he's gay, right? And you can see where those associations come from. That idea is pretty universal culturally.
At last, I've penetrated the facility. These images are coming to you live from inside this steamy paradise. But I've yet to have any charming encounters.
Oh yeah, content warning, homophobia, maybe?
This hot fog be the cause?
Tropes, etc.
It's like steam rising from sweat. My body's tingling with excitement.
And a lot of people, like, you know, so this is a criticism of Persona. A lot of people feel like they'll touch on LGBT themes and then give you a reason why they don't apply. Like they'll present a character that seems to be trans. Persona 4 also does this, right? And then tell you why they're not actually trans, and that was just a, you know, a problematic belief that they held or something. Yeah. So yeah.
Crap, this is so wrong in so many ways.
I remember it being kind of like this on Yukiko's show, too. No, it wasn't like this. Those voices again. Wait, are they louder this time?
These voices. I was wondering whose they could be since it's only the victim in here. Is it the people watching outside?
You mean everybody who's watching the Midnight Channel? They're reacting to the show? Yikes! If people are watching Kanji-kun now, he's gonna be a legend in a way he never intended.
Well, it's really his shadow, not him. But normal people won't know that.
The shadows are getting really restless.
That elusive thing I truly yearn for. Will I finally find it here? Well then, onward and deeper to reach further realms of romance. Let's get going, damn it!
Kanji-kun!
That was his other self. It's trying to reveal his hidden feelings. It seems much worse than that time with Yuki-chan's shadow. At this rate, it might end up getting bare naked.
Oh my god.
Bare naked?
Yes, bare naked. Because
Oh man,
yes.
here it comes. Was I supposed to laugh?
Oh, poor Teddy. Poor Teddy. Wait, what is his name? Kuma? Yeah, it's Kuma in Japanese.
There they are!
Kanji!
Okay, so here's what I wanted to show you. The confrontation between the self as a series of personas, you know, overlaid on the self. So in other words, the self as it sees itself, and the self that is composed of some of those socially unacceptable qualities that, you know, that when the person put the persona on, put the mask on, the things that they tried to discard, but I won't say discarded, right? Because you can't get rid of this stuff. If you sublimate it, it takes on a life of its own. It takes on a will of its own, right? So in other words, you know, like you kind of don't have control of how it manifests. She mentioned one way that this could manifest is it's homophobia, right? The person displaying a hatred of gay sexuality as a kind of cope against being considered gay, despite the fact that in this case, it's his interests and his personality that cause him to fear that he might be gay, but canonically is not gay.
Oh, come now. Enough with the charade. Isn't it awful to deceive people? To deceive yourself? What's so bad about doing what I want to do? And that has nothing to do with it. I'm what you really want, aren't I? Hell no! Oh, how I hate girls. So arrogant and self-centered. They cry if you get angry, they gossip behind your back, they spread nasty lies. They look at me like some disgusting thing and say that I'm a weirdo, laughing at me all the while. You like to sew? What a queer! Painting is so not you. But you're a guy. You don't act like a guy. Why aren't you manly? What does it mean to be a guy? What does it mean to be manly? Girls are so scary. I ain't scared of
Yeah, that's another trope about gay men.
them. Men are much better. They'd never say those awful, degrading things. Yes, I vastly prefer men. Hell with that! What makes you think you can say that shit with my face? Why, you're me. And I'm you. You do know that, don't you? No. Nuh-uh. No way! There's no way in hell that you're me!
Yeah, commenting on societal norms and pressures, but rarely subverting them.
You're me, and there's no denying it!
Kanji-kun!
Everyone, on guard!
Yeah, no, it's definitely an offensive like stereotype. Wait, is what? Wait, Constance is Shadow EJ?
Shadow, the true self. I'm just being true to myself.
So there's a truth to the shadow, right? But it doesn't comprise the totality of self. It's only through integrating the shadow back into ourselves that we get underneath the persona that we put on to protect ourselves. But again, this can only be done in a place where it's safe, right? So this kind of integration isn't likely to happen in a homophobic society, or at least is more challenging in that context.
And that's why I'll get rid of anything in my way.
So look, let me talk a little bit about this, okay? Since it's come up, I can only speak for the American experience, right? But my understanding of the quote-unquote gay accent, you know, which has a few names, some of them which are probably inappropriate, right? Is that it was kind of a code. So in a society that's homophobic, in a society that views gay attraction as an abomination, and you know, sees gay sex as a sin, a sign of psychological deviance, and you know, like, right, like a psychological problem, like you're fucked up, right? You know, that was you know, the traditional view of it. You know, it's impossible for gay men just go around saying, hey, I'm gay, are you? Hey, I'm gay, are you? Hey, I'm gay, are you? That would get you beat up and probably killed, like, being real, right? Because you know, people, you know, like, you know, this is, you know, right, that subjects you to the exclusion and abuse that society has for gay men and for gay people in general, right? So gay men can't do that. So how are they going to find each other, right? Because every human wants to connect. Every human wants to be with somebody. And if the person that you want to be with is of the same sex, how do you find a partner without getting your ass kicked? And the answer was, I mean, one way, like, one word I've heard for it is twink codes, although twink is a specific subset of gay men, right? But in other words, I think that the accent is considered part of the twink code, right? And this was a way of gay men, like, and some people naturally have a list, right? Some people just speak like that, right? So they would take, you know, a pattern of speech which, you know, had a context apart from homosexuality and use it as a code, use it as a way of identifying other, you know, gay men, so they would know who was safe to hit on or who was safe to try to, you know what I mean, try to be with, and who was not safe. So if you want to understand, and this is like a 90, like, right, if you look at gay men today, there is no way, there's no speech pattern for gay men. Gay men talk in a multiplicity of different ways, as does everyone else, right? Gay men are not born with certain speech patterns. That's not, you know, endemic to the gay experience. It was part of dealing with a homophobic society. And so, yeah, you'll see it more in, like, older media. You'll see it represented more and made fun of in older media. And yeah.
Are these Kanji-kun's true feelings?
This isn't really him. It's just his emotions going haywire.
This has nothing to do with you guys anymore. Didn't I just say I'm gonna get rid of you?
Okay, so it goes into the boss battle there, right? And we don't need to watch the Persona 4 boss battle. Okay, so this is golden, right? This is the... Okay, so after the battle, what...
Oh, damn it.
Kanji-kun.
Wait, Yukiko, something's wrong.
It's still coming at us! Kanji is still rejecting it!
Well, I can't blame him with this many witnesses.
So the idea is that they have these boss battles, right? And the real way to win isn't through superior fighting, isn't through, you know, hating what you're fighting, it's through embracing it and seeing it as part of yourself, seeing the part of you that is that self, and accepting that, right? That's the only, otherwise the shadow just gets stronger. As Jung would say, Jung had a metaphor about carrying a candle in the dark and feeling beset by a great shadow, a foreboding shadow behind him, right? And, you know, the only way to kind of get rid of that shadow is to blow out the light. But that's scary, right? That's scary, to let the shadow consume you. Really, you know, it's like the shadow's not big enough to consume you, and you consume it. But it's only by making yourself vulnerable. It's only in Persona by saying, I am thou and thou art I.
Such a passionate approach.
What?
I think that you three would make wonderful boyfriends.
Stop it! You got it all wrong.
Enough. Stop! What the hell are you blabbering about? I don't care who. Won't someone, anyone please accept me? Stop it! Accept me for who I am!
Whoa, whoa! I really don't swing that way!
I said stop it! Can't believe something like this is inside me.
Kanji, you're...
Yeah, I know. I've known all this time I had something like you. It ain't a matter of guys or chicks. I'm just scared shitless of being rejected. I'm a total pansy who tries to make everyone hate me. Come on, get up. Anyone who looks like me, I know they ain't so weak that they can't take a punch. I already know that you're me. You're me. And I'm you, damn it.
This scene is problematic for a number of reasons, right? But it's real. Like, internalized homophobia is real. Even the, like, sort of violence implied in this scene is real. I mean, like, this is a little too real, you know what I mean? And like, you know, like, it's annoying how, like, they couldn't have a character who actually was gay. That they, you know, canonically, the story is that he's just into stuff that's not typical for guys. That stuff that's, like, you know, considered feminine, right? And that because of that, like, you know, his fear is that, you know, that means that he's gay. But, like, it's like Persona, like, you get the feeling that maybe they're going to actually deal with an issue like homosexuality, and they don't. And that's what's really frustrating. Naoto, yes, exactly. Naoto, yeah. Similar idea. Really frustrating.
Kanji-kun!
Let's get him out of here.
Anyway, yeah, so that's just a little idea. Like, you're seeing kind of how it fits in, how these ideas, like, fit in with the game. And with our reality, you know, this is what I appreciate about this stuff, is it is very real, despite, you know, what we've said already about Jungian psychology being not particularly useful for therapy, according to most, you know, working therapists, right? There's some who do adhere to, you know, to Jung's, or like a modified version of Jung. And you know, granted that some of the things that Jung held as universal archetypes did not turn out to be so universal, we can still sort of appreciate, like, the elements of the sublimation that parts of our personality undergo in order to achieve social acceptability, in order to allow us to function socially in the world.
The opposite of one's gender. Okay, to say this in a less word salad
Oh,
way,
wait, here we go.
You have your, from the best I can figure from the series, binary gender. This archetype is a combination of the idealized form of the opposite gender as well as experiences you've had with people of that gender, starting with your parents. So me, I would have an animus. So me, as a woman growing up, I would have an...
So real quick, animus, the male within the female, anima, the female within the male, right? And the idea being that you end up internalizing like a model of the other sex in order to deal with the other sex. Yeah, I have a feeling that these archetypes are going to be even, more problematic than the last ones that we looked at, especially given like that our current understanding of gender isn't binary.
Animus, which is the male archetype, as well as incorporated experience of like my dad and other men in my early life. The collective unconscious provides
Yeah, it's fucked up, Joni. It's fucked up.
information about how people of the opposite gender should behave, and then that is tempered by experience. Like the shadow, this archetype is also projected, and how positive or negative this projection ends up being depends on the person and their anima or animus. And so it's thought that this is done as a way to test potential romantic partners to see if they're what they should be for you. Jung encouraged people to explore their animi, and if that's not the plural of these, it is now. He encouraged people to explore this aspect.
So there's little aspects that are like strangely progressive of Jung. This is probably one of them, like encouraging people to explore like non-standard gender expression, right?
Of themselves so that they could better understand their gender role, other people's gender role, its relation to their persona, and bring balance in all of this. Going back to the earlier example of the boy and girl who had to repress.
Yeah, but if you, I don't know, like spectrum or like continuum, right? Because if it's a continuum, then you come up with a question where like, if you want to draw up poles for a continuum, it's kind of arbitrary. And I would say that like the poles of male and female are kind of arbitrary. Gender-wise.
Aspects of their personality that were socially unacceptable. Once they're an adult and they start going through the individuation process, they can explore those aspects of their nature that aren't part of their gender role but part of the anima or animus, and embrace those characteristics that they had to bury before. Words to help you win Scrabble, Jung edition. Combining the anima and the animus results in syzygy, which represents unity, completion, wholeness. Talking about this stuff, I feel like I'm reading the descriptions for tarot cards. Anyways, the self archetype is something that people have to work towards. It's not something that they're born with. It requires a unification of the conscious.
Archetypes are based on Western binary mindset and are a product of the time and theory they developed in. Wonderful. Thank you, Joni. Thank you for putting it in much more descriptive and eloquent language than I was. Yeah.
And the unconscious parts of their personality. This is something we'll talk more about in the therapy section of this video. Figuring this stuff out kind of made my brain hurt, so if this doesn't make sense to you right away, don't feel bad. It's a lot. So there is a distinction between the self and the ego. The ego is at the center of consciousness, and the self is at the center of personality. On top of this, the self contains the ego. This is because your personality contains everything that is conscious and unconscious. The whole mind can influence your personality, but the ego is constrained by what's in conscious experience. If you happen to be familiar with Maslow and his hierarchy of needs, pyramid here,
So this is wait, I don't know if Cass is Canadian or American, but like I just noticed hierarchy. Maybe that's I don't know. Maybe that's a different pronunciation of it. Like I haven't heard it pronounced like that.
Archetype is kind of similar to the self-actualizing.
It sounds kind of like horoscopes. Yeah, in that like they're so, in some ways they're so arbitrary that you can impose, like you could see them as being true, but like almost regardless, right? Like, so like my whole experience with horoscopes is that if I read this description for my birth sign, I'll be like, yeah, that sounds like me. And then if I read the description for somebody else's birth sign, I'll be like, yeah, that sounds like me. You know? Like, I mean, there'll be some that like oh yeah, no, that's vastly different than me. But like I can see myself in a lot of different descriptions of horoscope.
Person. So if all of your other needs are taken care of, you can work on being this great, awesome person. It's kind of a similar idea, kinda. The other archetypes weren't as fixed in number or definition. Problem. There could be as many or as few as are needed. A non-exhaustive list includes the wise old person archetypes, and there's one for each gender, so I'll go through those in a sec. But basically, if a person successfully goes through the individuation process, then they sort of level up to these archetypes. The old man
That's so Aries.
archetype,
Aries.
also known
Aries.
as
Oh my
Senex
god.
because Latin makes things better, is the powerful and experienced man who can give guidance in tumultuous times. Apparently, there's a dark version of this archetype too, where instead of being wise, the person is destructive or idiotic. The woman version is the Great Mother. Instead of being generally wise in the way that people in the world work, the Great Mother embodies the idealized qualities of the mother figure. She is caring, compassionate, loving, and dependable, and like the wise old man, she may offer guidance when asked. I guess a woman isn't a woman until she's a mother? Hang on. Men don't get to be kind, compassionate, and caring in their final form? What? The best I can figure, the negative version of the Great Mother is again either somebody who's destructive, or, interestingly and kind of worryingly, somebody who is overly sexual. These wise old person archetypes also represent a final independence from one's parents, I think. I'm kind of really out in the weeds here, so let's move on. There's the hero archetype, which pops up anytime a story needs a protagonist. In Jungian psychology, the hero archetype represents the journey that people have to go through in the process of individuation. Start out comfortable, but isolated from the bigger world and its problems. You get a call to action. Call to action, hey, that reminds me. Like this video, comment, subscribe, Patreon, go on a journey
Call to adventure is what Campbell would call it.
of
Yeah.
adversity and growth, defeat the darkness, and become a better person. And then, being limited by the hero narrative in the hero archetype, the person goes back and embraces the darkness.
You're getting a little bit of my my educational path before I started into nutrition and exercise, right? This is what I studied.
I think.
As you can imagine, it's highly financially lucrative to learn about these things.
I'm still out in the weeds, I guess. In trying to understand this archetype in particular, I stumbled across this website, here-ish. The author of this website described the hero archetype as important but limiting, and described it as an important process that boys have to go through in order to become men. And I got to this part, and I wanted to share it with you all. The purpose of the hero archetype. The hero archetype, however, is in our psyche for a reason. It plays an important role to mobilize the boy's energy, will, and power to break from the mother at the end of the boyhood so he can face the tasks of life.
This is so essentialized.
In many hero myths, the knight enters a cave to fight a dragon. This dragon
how are
is a
you doing
symbol
as
of the
far
mother
as
archetype
sound?
that the hero must overcome to
Are we
return
okay?
to his village as a man. Just when I thought moms were safe from being the target for masculine growth, I toyed around with talking about more archetypes, but sorting through the good sources and the less good sources is a bit much, and there's a lot. So, moving on. Jung, like Freud, had a theory of personality development. I'd be willing to bet that unless an instructor is personally using Jungian psychology as a basis for their research, this is never taught in intro psych. And certainly I, and the textbooks, many textbooks that I've seen in my years of teaching and as a student, never talked about the Jungian development theory. I'm starting to understand why. Freud is easy to get through. You got the stages, you got the conflicts in the stages, what have you. Jung's is less easy to convey. Since archetypes exist in the collective unconscious, and we have access to that our entire life,
Johnny,
it would only make sense that these archetypes can influence and shape our development. People progress through the stages of life, although progress isn't necessarily linear, nor do they have to go through them completely. At each stage, the motivations and focus differ. These stages are ruled by an archetype, and they are the athlete, the warrior, the statement, and the spirit. The first stage, the athlete, is the least mature stage. In this stage, a person is very focused on themselves, and they're concerned about their appearance, their body, and just themselves in general. The focus on appearance is probably due to basically kids going through huge changes throughout the course of growing into an adult, and so, wow, what's my body doing now? It's weird, it's hairy, what's the smell? That sort of thing. So there's lots of changes, they're focused on themselves, and that's part of development. And it's possible for somebody to never leave this stage. The second stage, the warrior stage, is characterized by becoming much more goal-oriented and taking on more adult responsibilities. This can start in the teens and last until middle age-ish. It's called the warrior stage because in the stage people are fighting for something. Fighting for a better life for themselves, fighting against the world, fighting against themselves, just fight, fight, fight. In the statement phase, there's a shift from fighting for personal gain to a more outward, focused, connected view of things. The stage can be kicked off when somebody becomes a parent, because now you're having to take care of somebody who is entirely dependent on you, so your needs and your drives and your thoughts are focused on this other little being that you made. Or if you become dissatisfied in trying to find happiness through material possessions. The final stage is the spirit stage. In this stage, people realize that they are divine, spiritual beings, and that the material pursuits of the world aren't really that important, and so they fall away. Money, possessions, class, nationality, none of it really matters. This life is temporary, but the person's spirit is not. This body holding me, be my reminder here that I am not alone in this body holding me, feeling eternal. All this pain is an illusion. Channeling Maynard for a second there, sorry.
Channeling
Achieving
who?
this stage should be a goal
Does anybody
for
hear what
every
channeling-
person. Oh, this is why we never talk about it in intro psych. Moving on. Jung's approach to treatment is sometimes called the psychodynamic approach, sometimes it's called the analytic approach, both of these to differentiate it from the Freudian psychoanalytic approach. As I mentioned earlier, while they were colleagues for a time, Jung had enough problems with Freud's views of development and his approach that he did break off their connection eventually. The thing that Jung was doing that caught Freud's attention in the first place was his work on free association or word association, same thing. So Jung was doing these word associations to get at a person's unconscious psyche. We talked about word association in the Freud video, but in case you didn't watch it, quick refresher. Word association, you have the client read a list of words and they respond back with the first thing that pops into their head. And so as you're doing this, you can fall into a rhythm where the person is much more relaxed and able and willing to say the first thing that pops into their head, even if it's something weird like melange or something inappropriate like titties. Freud and Jung saw word association as a valuable tool in getting at a person's unconscious mind and whatever secrets may be locked away in there. Jung's approach to therapy was based on a lot of introspection work he did on himself and thinking and analyzing about his dreams, research he did into like anthropology and other things, as well as sort of trialing it out on people that he was treating as a doctor and a psychiatrist. We'll talk about a case study in a second here, but a lot of his published work is basically on his experiences and things he did and himself, basically. Additionally, Jung was interested in incorporating concepts or approaches from older works, things like Christian Hermeticism, alchemy, and the Tao Te Ching. Given his interest in archetypes and how they're thought to function, incorporating older works or non-Western works makes sense. Archetypes and complexes. Archetypes and complexes. Before we really get into how the therapy works, let's try to sort these two concepts out. Okay, so after wrestling with this for a while, I think I've got it. Archetypes are part of the collective unconscious, and these are abstracted from us, from day-to-day lived experiences, you and me, direct experiences. Complexes are the archetypes plus our actual experiences. Memories, thoughts, feelings, all of this are associated with that archetype. And those individually changed archetypes become these complexes. And these complexes live in the shadow archetype. But this isn't the entire story, because these complexes can splinter off from the main ego. And when they splinter off, this is the cause of neurosis. The basics of the Jungian approach to therapy are to help people gain access to these unconscious complexes so that they can work through them. As such, a major goal of therapy is to help people with the individuation process. In individuation, a person gains awareness of the repressed aspects of their archetypes that are being held down in the shadow archetype. The complex is holding them back. And everything else that's impacting their ability to function, all of that is revealed so the person can integrate everything and become their unified self. These repressed archetypal features must be allowed to coexist with the allowed archetypal features present in the ego. This will result in achieving wholeness. So that's individuation. Remember a couple of minutes ago when we were talking about the stages of life and it took a hard turn into Woo Town? I'm getting the same sort of vibe here. And I feel like I should be trying to synthesize the sources and really understand this, but I am hitting a wall. And so if I need to do that for the future stuff, future me is going to have to do it. But at this point, that is future me's problem. Suck it, future me. To Jung's credit, he did a lot of research and work on helping older adults find happiness, find meaning in their life again, instead of just focusing on the younger age groups. But, and there's always a but, as an atheist, the focus of some of it is a bad fit. Think back to the stages of life. While I have come to understand my place in the universe and tried to make some peace with the oblivion and annihilation that awaits us all, having a mental health professional telling me to embrace eternity and my divine nature isn't going to sit well, especially when I'm paying them for it. Especially when it's supposed to be helping me get better. As mentioned previously, Jung was big into word association, but he was also interested in dream analysis. Both of these were tools to get at a person's unconscious. If you watch the Freud video, hopefully you remember the difference between manifest and latent content. If not, or if you don't remember, manifest content is the content that's the surface level of what somebody's saying. It's the explicit meaning of something. The latent content is the subtext. It's the implicit meaning of something that somebody says. So you have somebody who says, I'm fine. The manifest content of I'm fine is they're fine. The latent content, especially if you are an analyst, is I'm not fine, I'm seeing you because I have complexes I need help with. So, subtext. Granted, it's not that straightforward, but hopefully you get the idea. If dream analysis or word association don't get you anywhere just on the manifest content, then as an analyst, you can start analyzing the latent content, and I think I just realized why they're called analysts. You can analyze the latent content for that subtext hidden unconscious meaning. For the Jungian approach, a lot of the latent content meaning will be derived from archetypes. Similar to Freudian psychotherapy, Jungian therapy will take time. Again, like Freudian therapy, you are looking at a commitment of at least once a week, every week, for years. Granted, a lot of therapy isn't quick, but the psychoanalysts and the analysts want a significant time investment from you. I'll talk about a case study that Jung described in one of his books, and then an example that I'm familiar with. Jung described a woman being admitted to the hospital that he was working at with depression.
Okay, so chat, I want to know, like, I would like to make videos on, like, the psychology behind Persona, the Persona series, for instance, right? Are you all interested in that? Like, how much interest is there in psychology? But the little dudes come up, and, like, I just naturally am like, little dudes. Mike from PV, thank you for the follow. Is there an interest in understanding Lacan, Deleuze, Guattari, etc. out there? De Saussure, I can't pronounce his name. Trying to think of, like, there's a lot of people in the psychological tradition who are also important in the Marxist Zizek. There we go, Zizek. Videos are good. This is highly searchable. Yeah.
At least what we would now call depression. It was called melancholia then. And her diagnosis after admittance was changed to schizophrenia, and prognosis not good. Jung disagreed with the schizophrenia part and started getting to work on trying to help her. Jung describes obtaining information directly from the unconscious about what brought this woman there, and he did this using word association and dream analysis. Her story was that she had been in love with
exploring how their ideas influence video games would be really cool.
A guy, but
and really SEO.
the feelings weren't mutual, as far as she could tell. So instead of waiting around, she married somebody else. 5 years pass, she has a couple kids, and is talking with a mutual friend. This friend tells her that no, actually, that guy that you liked did have feelings for you, he never said anything about it. At this point, she became distraught, and Jung describes this point as the start of her depression. So, in his retelling of her story, and there's a reason I'm emphasizing this, he says that while she's distraught, she's bathing her 4-year-old daughter, and doesn't notice the daughter put the sponge in her mouth and suck some of the water off. And unfortunately, the area that they lived in didn't have good, clean water. The girl caught typhoid fever and died. Soon after this, the mom is admitted to the hospital, and Jung starts interacting with her. So Jung discovered this truth that she killed her daughter and felt guilty about it, and agonized over whether or not to tell her. Because he was early in his career, he didn't know how she would handle it, if he would kill his career in the process, if it would make her worse. But he ultimately settled on telling her that you had this thing happen, you feel guilty about it, you feel like you killed your daughter. That's why you're here. And he says that she was released 2 weeks later. Slight problem I have with this story is it's so short and vague. We don't know what happened. Maybe that is how it went down. The girl sucked on a sponge while the mom was distracted, and that's when she caught typhoid fever. Maybe this is a memory that Jung helped this woman recover that she had repressed because she felt guilty about causing the death of her child. We don't know from the information that he gives. The other story is not Jung, not published, but I do want to be upfront when I do have personal biases, and I've got one here, so here we go. I've talked about my dad on this channel before, and I'm sure I'll talk about him again. On the good chance that you haven't watched my entire back catalog, here's the relevant points for what I'm going to talk about here. I was an accident. I wasn't planned. My parents had me in their 30s because my dad didn't want kids. My dad didn't want kids because he didn't know what was wrong with him, and so he didn't want to potentially pass on that to any offspring. The thing that was wrong with him was Tourette's syndrome and depression, anxiety, OCD, which does tend to be comorbid with Tourette's. And he was diagnosed with those when I was about 2 or 3. So that's 30 some odd years of life, not knowing why he has a muscle twitch, why he makes vocalizations, why he's depressed, anxiety, OCD, all of that. My dad's dad was physically and emotionally abusive towards him. In part, probably because of the Tourette's. Stop acting up, stop back-talking, whatever. And also because my dad wasn't a carbon copy of my grandfather. My dad's childhood was not a happy one. He could probably count on one hand the people who were nice or kind to him until he got into adulthood. So there's a lot of bad experiences and memories there. This is relevant. The final point before I get to why I'm talking about this here is my dad died unexpectedly when I was in high school. I was devastated, and it happened. But I can't ask him about these experiences now or talk to him knowing what I know now. So as I said, my dad got the diagnoses of stuff when I was 2 or 3, and so the psychiatrist he was seeing that gave him these diagnoses had a Jungian approach to things. And I found all of this out from my dad when my depression started manifesting itself in middle school. We had a lot of talks, and that's when I found this stuff out. Apparently, in the course of therapy, the psychiatrist started using hypnotic memory retrieval with my dad. And my dad recovered a memory of being sexually molested by his uncle one summer. And my dad, as he was telling me about this, said he always had a weird feeling about that uncle, but he could never quite put his finger on it until the psychiatrist helped him recover that memory. Then it all made sense. As I talked about in the Freud video, and as I'm planning to talk about in a future video on memory formation and recovered memories, these memories are just so suspect. It has been demonstrated in laboratory settings that we can implant memories in people. People will walk away from the experiment, not everybody, but some, will walk away from the experiment with a fake childhood memory. Some are happy memories, some are less happy memories, but we're able to put these memories in people that didn't happen. And these participants were not in a highly suggestive state, as somebody is when they're in this hypnotic memory regression experience. Oh, and my dad also recovered memories of being abducted by aliens. So, yeah. Therapy with this psychotherapist had to be broken off when my dad's insurance situation changed a little bit, so this process didn't continue, further memories weren't recovered. I wish I could talk to my dad about this now as a cognitive psychologist to see what his thoughts are. Yeah. So yeah, I have some feelings about the Jungian approach to things, and I'm sure I'll talk about that in the recovered memory video. So instead of me just personally critiquing one psychotherapist, let's talk about critiques in general of the Jungian approach. As with Freud, a huge problem for the Jungian theory of things is that it's not falsifiable. This means that Jung's theory is not able to be demonstrated as wrong or false in an experimental setting. Once more, less obtuse. Good scientific practices involve setting up the experiment so that there can be a null result or a null outcome. And we need to do this because the statistics that we use to analyze stuff, especially in psychology, comprise a null result. Less obtuse, not more. Right. A null result in this context means that whatever experimental manipulation you did didn't result in a difference between the conditions or groups. Example, Dr. Fancy Pants has a new nutraceutical that will improve people's ability to have sex with people from Tinder. Let's call it Tindies. Experimental participants, in demonstrating that this nutraceutical supplement works, are either given the nutraceutical, Tindies, or they are given a placebo, basically a sugar.
So a nutraceutical, just so you understand, I think you're dealing with like a substance from food that is extracted and concentrated that hasn't been accepted by the nutritional establishment as being, you know, essential, being helpful. There might be a theory, right? There might be somebody that comes up with a theory, then looks at the molecule and says, I think that this hydroxyl group will bond to this thing on the cell and cause this to happen. And that's a great theory, but until you can examine that theory, you know, it's kind of like the nutritional establishment is not going to touch that, right? There's been examples of things like this that have ended up, instead of being helpful, being harmful for people. So, you know, take it with a grain of salt, I suppose. Right? Maybe there are substances that have, you know, in fact, I'll be sure. I'll be firm on this. There are substances that we don't know about that are good for us, right? Statistically speaking, this is true. Okay, I feel pretty confident with this, with the number of, you know, substances in the food that we consume, and, you know, the other things, tea, coffee, you know, that humans consume, right? There's a lot out there. We're fairly early, I would say, as somebody who studied nutrition in undergrad. Just so I'm not, you know, exaggerating. I'm not a dietitian. I'm not a nutritionist. Okay, I don't have those certifications, but I am somebody who studied nutrition, who got a degree in nutrition as an undergrad. So take it as you may. But my you know, thought about the matter is that, like, you know, there's a lot that we don't know about what we eat and what effects it has on us. So, you know, is there a reason to look into stuff like this? Sure. But if somebody's trying to sell you something that's kind of untested, understand that they're making money off you regardless of your results. So, you know, don't read the fucking, like, you know how, like, every like supplement, or, you know, especially if it's like more on the woo side, it'll have this paragraph or 2 paragraphs or more, right? Dr. Bronner's magic soap is a bottle of soap that's got writing all on it by this guy Emmanuel Bronner, who, like, had interesting ideas about spirituality, I guess. I don't know. I can't really make heads or tails of it, but the whole fucking soap bottle has got writing on it, right? And, like, so I guess what I'm saying is, like, you know, the nutrition industry, especially the supplement industry, and especially the unproven substance supplement industry, they're great at writing a story about how their product might change your life. They're great at writing a story about, you know, to just kind of hook you. And, like, to them, it's just a story. It doesn't, like, there's there's a lot that's wrong with the supplement industry. I guess that's what I'm trying to say. Wow, how did I get here?
And they're told to take it every day. And let's say some good science is even happening here. The person who is giving the participants their supplement doesn't know what type they're being given. In the biz, we call that double blind because
it is good. So yeah, that's the thing, is it could still be a good product, and maybe some of this stuff like does something, you know, like maybe some of this stuff like, you know, like has a good effect in some way, right? But you know, maybe it's not the effect that you think you're getting. Maybe it's, you know, I mean, nutrition is so fucking complex, right?
the experimenter who's handing out the treatments can't inadvertently impact things. So double blind, people don't know what they're being given. They're told to take it every day for 2 months and keep track of how many times they successfully managed to have sex with somebody from Tinder. At the end of 2 months, they're brought back in, they share how many times they scored, and the results are calculated. After the data is compiled, it's found that the Tindies users had the same success rate as the placebo. So, null result, no difference between the groups. Therefore, the hypothesis that Tindies will help people score on Tinder is rejected. Taking this back to falsifiability...
So that one's falsifiable.
The way I described this experiment set up, it was falsifiable. It was possible for a null result to be found, like I described. Null result, so the hypothesis was false. However, we can bring this back into bad science territory if Dr. Fancy Pants, upon getting...
Yeah, so like vitamins, you know, vitamins are vitamins because they've been determined to be necessary for a human life, right? Like it's you know, like we've got reason to believe that you know, you need this. But there are also upper limits for vitamins. And when you get into the supplement industry, sometimes the supplement that you buy will exceed what, you know, our very limited knowledge of nutrition says is probably a healthy amount to have, right? And you know, there's a big feeling of like the like, you know, if something is good, therefore more of it is more good, right? And that's definitely not true with nutrition. That is definitely not true with nutrition.
The results goes, no, this can't be right. The Tindies had to be effective. The problem has to be that the people were taking it wrong.
Protein is good for you. Not having any protein is bad for you. But what about an all-protein diet? Wouldn't that be great? What about an all-meat diet, for instance, to give you a little more like foreshadowing into what subject she's going into, right?
Now, to be fair to Dr. Fancy Pants, it is possible that the participants were not taking the supplement as they should have been. I mean, birth control has some failure rate because we're really bad at taking things at the same time every day. That's just how it is. And so if the people behind the experiment are sure that this treatment should have resulted in some difference, they can rerun the experiment, verify whether or not this null result is representative. So Dr. Fancy Pants reruns the experiment. This time the directions on use are emphasized, and they even...
If I ever want to be grossed out, I can go to our carnivore diet. I've seen a little bit of the carnivore diet, and yeah, no, I can feel that. Like there's some people that eat like rotten stuff because they're like, well, our ancestors would have probably eaten some rotten raw meat, so it's good. Our ancestors would have probably eaten some maggots, so dig in.
Have an app that the participants have to check in on every time when they take the supplement. It gives them a little reminder, yes, I took it, to try to emphasize they need to take it at the same time every day. This experiment's run, double blind again, null result again. So no difference between the Tindies users and the sugar pill on success rate. Again, it is possible that this is coming down to user error. They could be eating some food or doing something that's just interfering with the supplement. And further experiments could be run testing these different sources of possible error. There does tend to be a point in science, though, where you get null result after null result, where you just have to go, you know what? It's not working. I'm probably wrong here. I'm not understanding some mechanism. It's not working. This isn't a hypothesis I should be fighting for. However, Dr. Fancy Pants can go the unfalsifiable direction and say, the Tindies isn't working because the people taking it don't believe it'll work enough. Dr. Fancy Pants has now wiggled out of the realm of good science and testable and falsifiable statements. Saying that a treatment only works if you believe in it is typically frowned upon by most scientists. This is because of a problem in measuring and quantifying belief. How do you know when somebody believes enough? The treatment works. If the treatment doesn't work, it's because they didn't believe enough. You know, it's...
Do you see what this is? This is religious thinking.
It's not good. We need
And
to
we don't want to have religious thinking in our nutrition, okay?
have a quantifiable
I mean, I'm sorry, I'm not telling you to not follow your religion's, like, prescriptions, you know what I mean, right? Fine, whatever, you know, your religion tells you not to eat something, it tells you to eat something on a certain day, fine, I've got no problem with that. But yeah, in general, we shouldn't have a religious mindset about our nutrition.
durable thing here that just, it doesn't work because they're not believing enough, doesn't offer. Basically, Dr. Fancy Pants is now operating under the assumption that Tindies works. You know, huge disclaimer there. If an independent lab comes in and tests Tindies and they get a null result, it's because they didn't get their participants to believe in the Tindies enough. Even if that independent lab goes out of their way, making their participants believe that Tindies works, somehow brainwashing them to believe with a capital B that Tindies works, and they still get a null result, Dr. Fancy Pants can just say, they still didn't succeed in getting the participants to believe in the Tindies enough. But it works. It totes works. You can trust me. I'm a doctor. I've got a TV show. Okay, so that was a bit of a random rabbit hole on falsifiability. I didn't feel like I explained it adequately enough in the Freud video, so there you go. Back to Jung. Recall that archetypes are specified in the theory.
Chat, I have never felt more validated in my, like, intellectual curiosity and desire to kind of, like, you know, not only examine things, but examine related things. Like, I feel like Cass Eris gets me. Do you know, I mean, not gets me, obviously, we don't really know, I don't know Cass Eris, but, like, I feel like a certain kind of kinship to her interest and expression of knowledge, I guess.
To be directly unmeasurable. We're back to needing to believe in Tindies in order for them to work without having a solid measure of belief. Science is built on measuring shit. Even the fuckiest of science, quantum mechanics, and yes, fuckiest is a technical term, I'm a doctor, I know. Even quantum mechanics has experiments backing the theories. Crazy, mind-blowing experiments, but falsifiable experiments nonetheless.
Including the double slit experiment.
Also recall that the number and definition of the archetypes are flexible without limit. To me, this indicates that there isn't a good mechanism explaining their existence. Where do they come from? They come from our shared ancestral experiences of life and common No. What drives the formation of an archetype? How universal is universal? Is it enough for the majority of humanity to have experience with something like, I don't know, cell phones?
Analogous magic?
For the rest of humanity to have an archetype and knowledge about that thing that they've never directly experienced? If it's a collective unconscious, then surely these remote, isolated tribes of people who are cut off from the rest of humanity would still have knowledge and access to these archetypes. How are these archetypes transmitted? Do people get software updates if there's a new archetype that is relevant to the collective unconscious?
I would say it's all transmitted through culture. And so, yes, if you're in a group that's not contiguous culturally with the rest of humanity, then no, you're not going to get the updates, and your shit will look different. And in fact, like, going into those cultures and superimposing our understanding of archetypes is immensely destructive to our understanding of what's actually going on in those cultures, right?
Conscious? Or if one falls out of use, is it somehow deleted from their OS? Or are they set at birth? Is this like a Lamarckian view of evolution where parents
Remember Lamarck from our discussion of Lysenko?
acquire traits and pass those traits on to their children? Parents acquire archetypes in their collective unconscious and pass those on to their kids? If the archetypes are acquired in this way, how does it make it to this collective unconscious? Or is the collective unconscious a relic of our past when humanity was a small group living in Africa where information could be transmitted before sort of exploding across the world? Okay, enough about the collective unconscious for now. Now I want you to go back and think about the case study with the woman. All we have is Jung's description of why the daughter died from typhoid fever. There's a bunch of problems with this. We only have his word that this is the mechanism through which the daughter caught typhoid fever. It's possible maybe she drank some water out of a puddle one day, or maybe it was during the bath, but it's not because the mom was inattentive, or any other number of things. It's possible that Jung pulled meaning out of this woman's unconscious that wasn't there. We also don't know what went down in his treatment plan for her, other than he directly pulled information from her unconscious using word association and dream analysis. That wouldn't cut it nowadays, at least in scientific publications. We need to know in a case study why this person's being studied, what's relevant about them, what we can learn from it, what treatments are done. We need to know in excruciatingly, painfully clear detail what is being done so that it can be replicated, it can be tested, it can be understood, not just I did stuff and it worked. Another huge problem for the Jungian approach and the Jungian theory is its reliance on mysticism and religion as a justification for the approach. These stages of life requires the existence of a spirit or a soul or something that is not measurable, and that it exists, and that it has some other plane of existence or something to go on to after this life.
Hey, I'm about to blow all your atheist skeptic minds, okay? With 5 words. Ready? Ready, atheists? What if it's a metaphor? Do you get it? Those of us in the atheist community often had a certain experience with religiosity, right? And that most of the time included literalism. I was brought up with the idea that every single word of the Bible was written, yes, by a man. By a man, yes, not a woman, but a man, yeah, right? But behind his arm was God's arm, and God's hand was over his hand, and God was directing this man to write just the right words. And if the man tried to write a different word, God was like, and he'd like move the dude's arm and he'd cross that out and like write the right thing in there. And that everything in the Bible is like divinely inspired, and so it can't be wrong because God's perfect. I was brought up to believe that. Legit. The problem is, if you actually read the Bible, there are statements in the Bible that are mutually exclusive, including the fucking creation story. Chat, read your Bible. There's 2 creation stories, not 1, but 2, written by not 1, but 2 different authors. So that should be a clue to the Christian literalists, right? That this is not meant to be a guidebook for, objective fact, right? And yet I was brought up with the religious belief, not only that like everything in here was true, but that I had to believe everything in here was true, and that not doing so would take my fate from one of eternal life and joy and oneness with God to a life of misery and annihilation and burning in a pit of fire forever, just because of belief. So I can understand wanting to just completely, like, reject that shit, okay? And on a literal level, I do completely reject that shit. However, I see a metaphor in most structure of religious teaching. And it's a metaphor which allows us access to the subconscious mind. Now, there's problematic metaphors, okay? There's stories that you almost have to read backwards in order to get any positive meaning from, right? There's some really fucked up shit in the Bible. But if you're not taking a literal interpretation of the facts in the Bible, you also don't have to take a literal interpretation of the morality in the Bible. You can see it as the zeitgeist of the time and take it as such, right? The story of Isaac, for fuck's sake, right? There's a lot of fucking yikesy stuff in religious texts. But there's a lot of yikesy stuff in us as well. And at its best, mythology serves as an access route at the unconscious mind. there are people, you know, obviously, like, she's talking about, like, a spiritual belief. It sounds like that's what Jung was talking about, too. And yes, like, the way he describes Philemon, right, is that, like, he believes that this was, like, a spiritual being that visited him. He doesn't think of it as a metaphor. So Jung is definitely not, like, on, you know, the mental track that I'm on. But, I mean, I do kind of see, like, I want to, be critical of religion and, you know, dismantle the power structures, the hierarchies established by religion, and see how religion is misused, right, in almost all societies, right? So it's like important to retain that critical eye, but also be able to see the beauty in some mythological stories, be able to see yourself in those structures, in those archetypes, and that maybe it can be helpful outside of a literal, like, context. I don't know, chat. Is that a spicy take?
And leading a meaningful and fulfilling life requires you to embrace these truths at some point. As the French would say, qu'est-ce que fuck? Conclusions. So this was the closest approximation I could give you for Jungian psychology. A whole lot of words, written in largely incomprehensible language, about things largely metaphysical. This could also describe the thing that I've been building to with these videos, but that's for next week. If you're curious about what is coming and the projects I've got kicking around in development, I am keeping a list on Patreon of that stuff, so check that out there. And if you have suggestions or you want to see something sooner, let me know. See you guys in the next video. Bye.
Yeah, so she's kind of been on this kick for the last 2 years, it seems like. And I could see why. I appreciate her indulgence in in one subject in depth, as well as the related oh god, here we go. So to get back to Persona's homophobia. Wait, I don't remember this part.
Whoa! Hey!
One ahead.
So, wait. I'm trying to figure out, are these the new scenes that are, like, less problematic? Or so if you don't know, Ryuji's the butt of the joke, you know, kind of the Yasuke character in Persona 5. And, you know, he's goofy and stuff like that. So, of course, they put a scene in there of, you know, gay, and it looks like 2 scenes, actually, of gay guys, like, hitting on him. And the joke is supposed to be, poor Ryuji, he's getting hit on by predatory gay men. Like, right? It's not exactly funny, if you recognize the trope.
Really?
So in the English version of Persona 5R, in other words, you know, when they updated it for the English-speaking audience, they changed the scene. In the Japanese version, apparently the scenes were not considered problematic enough to change, so...
You think one of those girls changed her mind?
OMG, it's the golden boy himself! And he's already got his own little entourage. We really did teach him right, didn't we?
You? Oh no. What are you guys doing here?
Oh, sometimes we just gotta get out of the city, forget the nightlife, breathe fresh air, enjoy some eye candy.
We thought we lost our protege. Who would have guessed our vacay was actually the call of fate?
Oh, what's with the look? Don't believe in fate? Or did you really not have fun last time?
You gonna tell us you saw yourself in all that chiffon and felt nothing?
I don't think I felt what you guys were hoping.
Oh, honey, I get it. Everyone's nervous when they first start out. But trust me, you'll make their jaws drop.
So do you see what's wrong with this? It's pretty clear, right?
Just an hour at the Vanity, 3 hours at the boutique, and we can just...
The idea that older gay men are trying to groom, you know, that like, instead of seeing like homosexuality as like kind of an organic phenomenon, right, that arises in the person, it's being portrayed here as indoctrinated or recruited, right? These are tropes. These are really fucking harmful tropes, right? And this was how gay men were seen.
pick up where we left off.
I mean, in the US too, right?
last time. So, are you ready to steal some hearts?
We gotta go. Sorry.
Was it something I said? Oh, what a tragedy. Another starlet slips through our fingers.
No more makeovers. By the way, where's Yusuke?
So this is where you two were. I've been searching for you.
What are you doing with those lobsters?
What is he doing with those lobsters?